Thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. My name is Dr. Leslie Strasser Murdoch, and I am the Educational Liaison for the Clark County Department of Family Services. I'm also the owner of ELM Educational Consulting, and I'm here today with my colleagues from the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada's Educational Advocacy Program, Ilka Fisher, Anthony McKenzie, and Amy McConnell. So they are all educational advocates with Legal Aid Center, and they're a wonderful resource that we at the Department of Family Services are so lucky to have. So today we're going to be presenting on help with IEPs and 504s for online hybrid learning. So to begin with, we know these are clearly unprecedented times. We know that there's a lot of stress and so much more responsibility on the family to support their children. A lot of teachers are learning a new learning platform and trying to figure out, even though they're able to teach in person, they're learning new ways to reach students online, creating brand new classrooms. We have staff members that have, again, things are being done in education that have not been done before. So with that, and besides teachers, staff, and parents, this is a whole new situation for our students and for our children. So with that, one of the biggest things that we can do is try to do the best that we can to help our children to manage a lot of anxiety. So with that, some of the best things that we can do is to, keep calm. Kids are definitely looking to us and see what our reaction is and listen to what are some of the stresses for our children. It's great to check in with them to see what, how they're doing, how's the learning going, are you having any struggles? If they do have any struggles, again, to contact their teacher and see what we can do. It's also important to let kids know that there are going to be certain things that come up that are completely out of their control. So every once in a while, technology is not going to work. My daughter's classroom, all of a sudden, their Wi-Fi went down, and so the kids were all kind of stuck. There's going to be all kinds of glitches. There's going to be all kinds of new things. And again, the idea is for us to be patient and also let them know that, if it's out of their control, don't worry about it. Nothing bad is going to happen. During these times, it's also helpful to follow a schedule and a daily routine, even though we're not in school in person, or if it's a hybrid situation, it's great to have a time to get up in the morning, time to have breakfast, time to go to classes, even though independent work time may look a little bit different, to try and still maintain, this is your time to work between periods, just to kind of keep a sense of normalcy and schedule really helps our children to kind of move forward and continue to be successful. And then the other part is it's really important to let kids know that when there are struggles, and also for you guys as family, when there are struggles, that there is a team behind it. So teachers are there to help you. The nice thing about some of online learning is for the first time, we have teachers that may have longer office hours. There's more time to reach your teachers. There's also support staff in schools. Often in schools, there are counselors available. There are social workers available. There are assistant principals and principals to help with anything. We have a lot of the time schools also have some local IT folks that can work if there's a problem accessing the classes or there's a problem with email. So there is a group of folks at the school to be able to support students and families. So if you don't know who to contact, don't worry about that. The most important thing is call the school. Let them know what your struggle is. Let them know what your child is struggling with, and they will point you in the right direction for the appropriate staff member. So now we're going to go in a little bit more to special education. So we're going to be focusing in the beginning on hybrid learning and a little more of the specifics of how we can get services during this particular time. But then we're also going to be looking at overall special education, because while this is an unusual time, that doesn't necessarily alleviate, and we still have all the same legal requirements put into place. So again, we'll go over that as we go along. But it's important to know, if you think about the way school services work, is there are going to be services and there is going to be programs for all students. Then we have kind of a second, if you think about these as different circles on there, then we have all children with disabilities. So we have a smaller subsection of, usually it's anywhere between 10 to 13% of the population have special education services or those kinds of things. So we have that. The next part is there are children who, so first, not all children with disabilities necessarily need or have special education services or 504. So the next part, and those inner circles, have to do with children that need special school services. So there are two different types of services which we'll go over, but under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, children with physical or mental impairments that substantially limit a major life function. A major life function would be education, could be learning. Those children, if they have those impairments and they have a struggle, they are entitled to having a 504 accommodations plan, which we'll discuss in the next couple slides. And those are, again, those are looking at accommodations and modifications. However, for a higher level of service, we have an IEP that you can receive through IDEA, the Individual Disabilities Education Act. So in order to qualify for those, we have children, you have to have one of 13 different disabilities qualify under those. And then you also must need special education services. So those children actually will be receiving an IEP. So the two different types of services that are legally required if a child is eligible can be delivered through a 504 plan, or you can also get one through an IEP. So we're going to go over what those look like a little bit more specifically. So there are several federal laws that protect children, the rights of children with disabilities. The first one, as I mentioned, is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. That is where we hear the term 504 plan or 504 accommodations plan. The other federal law is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. And that is where through IDEA, children receives IEPs, individualized education plans or programs. And so that is the plan, and that's the delivery of service through there. We also have several state laws that provide services for children with disabilities. We have the Nevada Revised Statutes 388 and 395, and we also have the Administrative Code. If you go on just to the website, you put in Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 388 or 395 or the codes, all the laws will pop up there. So a lot of things we're discussing, if you're curious as to what the law says, we definitely recommend going to just putting them in your internet browser, and you can actually see what the laws require. So some of the big pictures when it comes to online learning and legal rights is school districts must still adhere to any federal laws and state laws. Just because there is if a school is offering education, then at that point, whatever education they're offering, we still need to offer services within those. And also, if school districts are receiving federal monies, then they absolutely have to adhere to IDEA and 504. So again, if a school district is offering virtual education, hybrid education, then services must also be provided within those. It does not absolve a school district from adhering to IEPs. We can make changes to IEPs. We can look at amending IEPs for different services. Again, they are unique to children, but if the state is offering any sort of education, then children are still entitled to services under their IEP. School districts also must provide free and appropriate public education to meet a child's needs. So the two key components of this are appropriate. Appropriate means it must meet the child's unique needs. Very important, because if a child, again, needs access to certain types of accommodations, certain types of services during online learning, and that is the way in which for them to make meaningful educational progress, then it's something that needs to be discussed. And that's where parents would go ahead and state what they need or what the struggle is and what they believe that the child needs to the school, so the school may meaningfully consider it. Again, the idea is also for meaningful educational progress. So what we are looking at is if a child is not making progress through distance learning, or we're seeing that they're not hitting the benchmarks or the goals, then we do need to go back into the IEP and actually look at what we need to do to be able to support that child, whether we need to modify the goals or whether we need to provide extra services so they can continue to make progress along with what the goals and what are the information in their IEPs or in their 504 plans. So what are some of the tips for online learning and hybrid? So the first thing is it's really important to know, outside of just the IEP, understand how services are being delivered and how school is being delivered. Some schools right now, for example, in Clark County, they are doing 4 classes only, a year's long worth of education or learning. So that's really important if you know, because in some ways the pace is a little bit accelerated if they're doing that. Some schools are doing block schedules. So again, they have a certain amount of time. They may be doing periods 1, 2, and 5 one day, 1, 3, and 6 another day. So again, it's different. Once you know the schedules and how they're delivering services, it allows you to kind of figure out what type of support they might need through their IEPs. And one of the things to let you guys know is anybody, again, who during online learning or during hybrid learning, it's actually incredibly beneficial to have an IEP, because that is an individualized education plan to be able to make sure that children are moving forward in their education. So IEPs are a great vehicle for making sure that learning isn't lost during online online during the online instruction. So that's really important to know too. The other thing is when you have struggles, it's important to know who your school point of contact is. So for children attending the Clark County School District, for those that have IEPs, there is a case manager or a special education teacher who is assigned to your child. If you do not know who that is, please make sure you contact your child's school and find out who it is. By now, hopefully case managers or special education teachers, if you're not in the Clark County School District, have reached out. So that is your point of contact. So for any issues, any concerns, don't worry as parents if you don't know exactly the right language to use, you just let them know what your child is struggling with or what your family is struggling with. For children with 504 plans, schools usually assign a 504 liaison. So there's going to be someone on the school campus who is in charge of ensuring that 504s are being given, and also as the point of contact to make any sort of changes. So again, if you don't know who that is, contact your child's schools. If again, there's any issues with the case managers or with the liaisons, or you feel like your needs are not being met or your concerns are not being addressed, that is where you look at, they usually refer to or they report to the assistant principals or the principals of schools. So that's kind of where you'd be looking at. There are also in Clark County School District, there are special education instructional facilitators, or what they call SEIFs. So what they are, they're kind of designated by the principal, the assistant principal, and or the schools to be able to be kind of experts in special education, to understand what programs and what things are available via the school district. So they also work as a part of the IEP team, and they're also a resource for you if you would like to contact the schools and talk to them as well. So you have SEIFs, you have liaisons, you have teachers. These are all people that are point of contacts. If you're not sure, then please start with your case manager or your 504 liaison. One of the things, again, consider, what struggles your child is having. So now, again, what we need to be looking at is, now that we're about I think this is our 5th week into distance learning or hybrid learning. So now it's a point at which we start as parents, you are not considered educators, but this is a time in which to start looking at what is your child struggling with? What is going on with distance education? Are they having a hard time paying attention to the online learning? Are they having a hard time focusing or getting their work done during the independent learning time? Are they understanding where to turn in their assignments? Are they understanding what is required of them? So as you as parents are noticing this or seeing these things happening by either observing your child or by talking with your child, this is a time in which to start noting and, connoting and writing down even what those struggles are. Once you know what those struggles are, please contact your teacher of record or your schools to let them know that you have concerns. You as parents absolutely have the right to request an IEP or a 504 revision. Don't worry if you don't know what your child's needs. That's not your job. Your job is to say, I think my child is really struggling. These are the things that I've noticed that he's having a hard time with, or she is having a hard time with, and therefore in which I would literally like to set up a meeting to go over what further supports or what else I can do to be able to support my child. So that's really the most important thing to do. And I think now, usually at the beginning of the school year, we recommend giving it about 2 to 3 weeks of just trying to kind of see what's happening, because a lot of kids are right now just even learning the technology and trying to adjust. But by now, we're kind of into the meat and into the content of the classes. So this is a really good time to check in with your child, or even do some, you could even do, I know a lot of parents work. If you have someone at home with your child or whoever's there, take a period of time and just observe them. Watch them during the teaching class, watch them during independent learning. Just kind of take mini snapshots of how they're doing, and that will give you an indication as to, again, what their struggles are and what they're doing well at. You can absolutely schedule a time to talk with your teacher. You can talk with your child's teachers when it comes to class content. You can talk with your child's case manager. You can talk with your 504 liaison. This is a good time in which to, if you want to, just set up a meeting, send an email. Usually during virtual learning, some of the best times you can call, but I definitely think sending an email is a great way to contact, especially in writing. Most teachers' information is on the websites. If you need a teacher's email address, if you don't have it, again, please contact your child's school. Also, one of the things you can do, that one of the best things when it comes to online learning, is really opening up that communication. So one of the things you can do is try to talk to teachers or staff members and find out, how can I communicate with you? Set up a homeschool communication plan so that both of you guys, the teacher can take data as to how the child's doing. the parent can take data, and this is a time in which even more that parent school collaboration, discussion, conversation, possibly coming up with different solutions, is it's even more important during online learning than ever, because again of parents being such a, or caregivers or anybody's home with a child being such an important part of this. So what any of you guys are seeing at home, please share that with the teachers and let them know, because they may not be able to see that. And that way you guys can come up with a check-in plan, whether you maybe check in with each other once a week, whether you guys every couple weeks check in, whether you communicate via email or via phone. It's always nice as parents to find out from teachers what's the best way of communicating with them, and also find out again, what makes the most sense. Sometimes it's hard for teachers to communicate every single week or every single day. There are some really good class programs that teachers hopefully use, but it's always nice to say to teachers, what's the best way to communicate with you? I really would like communication with you, but can you tell me what the most efficient way would be, or what's the easiest way for you? Okay. So we already talked about setting up a homeschool communication plan. We already talked about setting up an IEP revision plan, and updating things that can be updated in both the 504s, the IEPs. The first thing is, these are different components of the IEP. You can update what we call present levels. So present levels are how a child's doing right now. Some kids may have lost some learning or lost some education. They may be not where they were the last time that you had an IEP meeting. So what you can do is, you as a parent and or you can ask the teachers to update the present levels to state where the child is right now based on their learning. So again, IEPs written, if they were written last year, may be very different than what they look like right now, because we need to start planning for children at this time where they're at right now. So we can update that. Another part is parent concerns. So this is definitely something that you can add to. So if you are noticing concerns specifically with online learning, you can put that into your parent educational concerns. If your child does not know how to log on to a program, or doesn't know how to, again, access the assignments, or is having a hard time, advocating or asking questions, these are the things that you can put in. And actually, those can be updated to even put into goals and benchmarks. So we can actually put in an accessing education goal, understanding where your classes are during online learning. You can actually update your goals and your benchmarks to include some special help with online learning. You can also add some extra time. So if you feel like what you were given originally in your child's IEP, they're not getting enough time, or they're not getting enough assistance, you can actually go into the IEP and add extra time in there. You can add time during, and by the way, you can also specify in the modifications or accommodations when that time would be. So let's say your child is really struggling getting work done during independent work time. You could ask for a little bit of extra time for a teacher to check in with your child during independent work time. Or let's say your child is not paying attention, or you feel like is really struggling with attention during the time that they are teaching, which is called synchronous teaching right now. You can actually ask that maybe a teacher helps your child to focus, or maybe keeps an eye on to make sure that your child is actually engaging in learning. So some of the things, and again, these are more IEP based. However, modifications and accommodations are in both the IEP and 504s. So some things that we mentioned that may be helpful for you, if this works best for your child and you, is, again, we already talked about the homeschool communication plan. You can specify that in your accommodations and modifications. You also can ask for, if you are interested in making sure that there's recorded lessons or notes or something your child can refer back to, you can put that into your child's accommodations to make sure that's being provided. You can actually, if the workload, a lot of our children right now are struggling with the workload for online learning. I know that sometimes too many classes, having too many assignments, organizing that is a lot. You can actually modify homework. You can modify assignments. You can put things in. So you can cut down the work, for example, for what they call mastery. So if your child seems to understand it, let's say there's 10 math problems, but after about 3 or 4, your child seems to get it, then maybe, again, you could actually put in an accommodation that they can stop after they've demonstrated they've mastered it. You can also cut down workload by percentages. You can also cut it down by time frame. You could say the child will only work for a half an hour per class. Like, whatever is reasonable for your child, that is something that you can actually put in an accommodation. You can also put in breaks if your child needs a break between classes. It's something that you can support, that they have 5 minutes between classes to be able to do things if they don't have that. You can put in also, as I mentioned, when you want the support. That would go in your IEP. If they need support during teaching time, they need support during learning time. And if you need to, you can also have them have virtual schedules. So if a child needs to know where to go at particular times, you can actually, what's nice about some of the online learning is there's actually some really neat tools that can be provided to help your child stay on schedule, remember what classes. And these are all great resources that your case manager or your 504 liaison would be able to recommend. Again, I know I keep repeating it, but the idea is that you may not know what services are available, but if you describe what the struggles are or what your child is doing, that is where schools and teachers and staff should come back and make some recommendations that hopefully would be able to work. The other thing you can look at is, are there any outside resources? So outside supports can really also help families at this particular time. So what are some of those outside supports? For those of you that do have children with disabilities that have diagnoses, sometimes through insurance, you could actually see if there are some supports available. There may be some, for example, ABA tutors that can come in. There may be some folks that can come into your home to be able to help you or help you with online learning. So you can actually contact your insurance and see if there are any supports. Also at this time, this is a great time if your child works with a therapist or a behaviorist or anybody else that you could actually work with. That is a good time to think about whether they can help you a little bit with the online learning. There are parenting classes available in the community. I know at DFS we have sent some information out. Please contact your caseworker or your DFS representative if you feel like some of these supports are you're interested in getting for you. If you're if you have a child in foster care, find out what your options are. And then there are also advocates and consultants in town. As I mentioned, my colleagues, the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, their educational advocacy program is available to work with you guys, be able to provide advice and support. They're a wonderful resource, and their information is going to be at the end as well. So a little bit of the Section 504 Rehabilitation Act. Again, it is a federal law. It makes sure that a child is getting services through that we make sure that they may not be discriminated or we have to remove barriers. It's a barrier removal law. And that is where, again, what we have that is services are provided through a 504 plan. 504 plan, this is actually a list of different recommendations for online learning that may help. If you guys, again, we won't go through all of them here, but as this is being recorded, or I might even make a recommendation that if you want to take your phone and take a photo of this particular slide, if any of these accommodations would be helpful for your child, you can provide them to your child's 504 liaison or even your IEP and say, I learned that tests can be read out loud to my child. This is something that would be my child really needs for online learning. I learned that, students can meet with a trusted staff member when they're frustrated. So this is a list of different types of accommodations that are available via schools. Again, there is no list of accommodations that specifies or that is just a small list of what children can have. It's really about their unique needs. So if any of these are beneficial, or more importantly, it's not even beneficial, the law would say that your child needs these to be able to access education, then go ahead and you can make recommendations to your team or use any of these and say these are really important. As you'll see, a lot of accommodations can be made with extra time, cutting down on work, extra time for tests, cutting down on work. If there's frustration, giving them some sort of support. As I mentioned, the taking breaks. There are, again, even though we're not in school, there are different staff members available to work with your child. So this is, you could actually put into your accommodation IEP that the child or your family can work with a social worker, with a counselor, meet with a trusted adult to be able to have that, a little bit of that interaction that can be put into your IEP. Again, you also can put yourself, parents, into an IEP. So if you guys need more information or caregivers need more information about how to access online learning, you can put an accommodation into your either IEP or 504 that parent will be presented with information on how to access online education and also how to make sure that they can be in contact with schools. So the main differences between a 504 plan and or 504 and IDEA, if you look at some of the bottom ones, we've already talked a little bit more about it. 504 is only accommodations and modifications to the regular ed classroom given by the general ed teacher. So there is no removal with a 504 plan. It is something that we're kind of modifying the general ed classroom or modifying some of the teaching. We may be giving kids extra resources, but we're not necessarily pulling them for extra services. They don't have a special education teacher assigned to them. It is just something that, again, if you think about it, it's removing the barriers. That's really what the 504 plan is supposed to be. An IEP is a higher level of service because you actually have, rather than just accommodations and modifications, you have an individualized education plan. It is an actual plan that takes a child from where they're at right now to where they should be within a year. In an IEP, there are extended school year services that can be provided. A special education teacher can pull a child or can push into a class depending on what a child needs. There are different services are available, related services, so it is a much higher level of support. If you have a 504 plan and it's not working and you feel like your child needs an IEP, you can request an evaluation for that. Also, sometimes if a child is receiving services doesn't need the highest level of the IEP, they can actually go ahead, whether it's during a reevaluation, they can actually get a 504 plan and use that. So either way, there's services available. It just should meet the unique needs of the child. We've already talked a little bit about IDEA, but some of the biggest components of IDEA is that students have a right to a free and appropriate public education and related services. So as we mentioned, appropriate means unique to the child's needs. Just because a child has a particular disability, it doesn't mean they need a certain set of services. It's really based on where the child's at, where the child's struggles are, where the child's strengths are, to be able to provide that support. Some people don't know, but early childhood services can be provided. So starting at the age of 3 and all the way up through 21. And actually in Nevada, we've actually increased it. It can be up through the age of 22. So at least they can finish that year. If they turn 21 within that year, then they can go ahead and still get services up to their 22nd birthday until they kind of finish that year. So a child can stay in school for a longer period of time than a typical child if they have an IEP, and it would be based on their IEP goals. And as I mentioned, services again for IDEA come through an IEP. So who can refer a child for special education services? So in order to get IEPs, then a child needs to be referred for an evaluation. Even though a child gets an evaluation doesn't always mean they qualify, but again, there are several different people that can refer a child. School professionals, teachers, counselors, administrators can refer a child. Parents can refer a child. If you feel as a parent that your child needs special education services, then that is something that you can actually request. And there can also be Department of Educations can provide it, or different agencies can actually. So those are some of the different people that can refer a child for an evaluation. So it's not, parents sometimes, again, think that if they go and say, my child needs special ed or services, it's actually an evaluation. There's a whole process that takes place in order to get services. So how do you refer a child for services? The best way to refer a child is to actually put it in writing. And the best things you can do is actually go ahead and put in writing that if you are a parent, that I believe my child needs special education services. However, if you have told your school or you have done it orally and stated that your child may need services, then schools are actually required to follow up on that and to have a conversation or set a meeting to find out a little bit more. So we recommend writing, but that doesn't always mean that's not necessarily what needs to happen. It's really helpful as a parent to state why you think your child might need services. So again, that would be, my child either has a disability, or I suspect the child has a disability, or the teacher suspects my child has a disability, and then also the reason your child might need services. So if your child is struggling academically, but also behaviorally or socially, or they're having a hard time focusing, those are all things that might impact education. So it's not just about academics, it's about anything that might be getting in the way of the child's education. So if you can let the school know a little bit about that, that's kind of the way it would work. Usually what happens with most schools schools is when they hear that, they'll set up a meeting for you. But under the law, the school district, when there is a request for a special education evaluation, the district must either agree and do the evaluation or deny. It's either or. If they deny, they have to let a parent know as to why their denial is. They have to do that in writing within 30 days. So for any parent that is requesting or has requested an educational evaluation, it can't just go unnoticed. You can't just not hear from the school. There has to be something actually provided, or else there would be a failure to evaluate and a failure to notify the parent. So that's really important for parents to know about. How does a child become eligible for services? They first have to fit under one of the different categories. So what I like to say for the categories is, just because your child fits under the category of autism or specific learning disability, really that is the key for opening services. It is not a one size fits all. So once a child fits under the criteria, then at that point we open up services and we just meet the child's unique needs. There are particular, again, some we need suspicion of a disability, but if a child is struggling behaviorally or emotionally and we don't have a diagnosis, a child can be evaluated under the serious emotional disturbance category. So it is a category in which if you don't have a diagnosis, but your child is struggling emotionally, socially, academically, that is something we can look at that particular category. If the child doesn't have a diagnosis but is struggling academically, we can look at a specific learning disability. And that's another category in which we can provide services. So these are all the different categories. So must meet one of these. As a parent, don't worry about it. Again, if you go in and you just say my child needs services, they will go over which categories that they will be doing an evaluation under. And then at the end of the evaluation, they will go over which category your child might be eligible under or not. And either way, as long as the doors are open and they're eligible under a category, we are going to service the whole child to make sure that the child gets resources and services. So how does this happen? So there's an evaluation process. You as a parent will probably be asked to fill out forms. You may be told that your child is going to undergo testing. It goes through a formalized process. And then they're going to set up usually what we call an MDT meeting, a multidisciplinary team meeting, where everyone comes together. Usually the evaluation process is orchestrated or overseen by the school psychologist, but there's going to be different people involved depending on the eligibility. So you may be in a meeting, usually there's an administrator, the school psychologist, there's usually a special education person in there, a teacher, there may be a regular ed teacher. You also, if it's a health related issue, you may have a school nurse in there. If the child's being evaluated for related services like speech or occupational therapy, OT, or physical therapy, they may be in there as well. The team decides what category the child is eligible under, but as I mentioned, it does not determine service. As long as it opens up, we will treat the child as a whole and figure out what that child needs. So once a child's eligible for services, then an IEP is created for that child, and a child continues to be eligible for services for every 3 years. So every 3 years from the date the child was made eligible, we go ahead, we double check, and there is a reevaluation. The reevaluation is usually additional testing. We're still looking, does a child need educational services? Do they need special ed? At that time, there is an option of either doing further testing or it can be waived. What that means is that there's no longer a need for testing. The school believes the child still meets the criteria and still needs services. However, you as a parent or as a caregiver, it's very important that you actually can agree or disagree to waive it. So if you feel like at that time that testing would be a bad time to do it, you agree that the child needs services, you can agree. However, during a reevaluation, you get some really great information. So if your child at this point is okay with being tested and you want some more information about your child, it is a really good thing to not waive those, to go ahead and you could do some further testing, you can do some data collection. It's a really great time because kids there's a big difference from over 3 years as to how a child might be performing. So it can look at many different areas. Finally, under IDEA, it is, again, if a child is determined to have services, then the parent has to consent to the services. Parents actually have the right to unilaterally take their child out of special education services if they believe it. We would highly, as a team, not recommend that happen. You can always lessen services, you can change services, but just by having your child eligible for service, they receive certain protections and certain services that can be really important for their education and for their success. So it's really important to know that. So once they're eligible for services, they will be given, again, plan services based on their unique needs under the FAPE, and that's that appropriate, the A part of that, and it has to be at no cost to the parent. The services must be provided for free. FAPE is provided through the IEP, and that must be created within 30 days. So usually some school districts will go ahead and do the MDT evaluation results meeting, and they'll also have a draft IEP at that particular time. If not, within 30 days, it has to be created. And usually a lot of the data from that IEP is taken from the evaluation. So that is, and now I am going to turn it over to my colleagues over at the Legal Aid Center to go over the IEP and some important information from there.
All right. So an IEP, like Leslie mentioned, is an individualized educational plan. This plan is implemented after the MDT meeting that she just spoke about, and this determines the proper placement services, basically like a contract with the district. So we tell parents, if you find that you think your child or the student needs a specific service, or the school needs to be providing an accommodation to the child, we ask them to put it in the IEP, just because these school districts will have to then hold that as if it's a contract. It has to be an agreement between the school-based team and the parent. So it's not just a plan that the school is going to put in place on their end. It's going to have to be a collaboration with the parent. They have to have the parents' feedback, and it has to be a complete collaboration between all parties. And then these are the what's included in the IEP process. So they will have prior written notice must be provided to the parents. That way that you guys can be able to attend the meetings. They have to keep you involved in the meetings. They have to pick a mutual agreed upon time. So they can't just hold meetings. They can't just say, okay, we're going to have the meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. They have to work with you. They have to understand that, some parents are working, some parents are teachers right now. So they have to be able to accommodate your schedule. They also have to have an IEP meeting once a year. So with that said, just because there is an annual meeting doesn't mean that you can't make changes at any time. So at any point in time, you can request an IEP meeting to make changes. And then you have to also be able to agree or disagree with the IEP. So this is what's included in the IEP. These are the components. It starts with the present levels, what the student's strengths are, interests, what your parental concerns are. This is the section where you can include what your concerns are, where you see that the student needs support, where you see that they need that additional accommodation or related service. That's your time to shine. If you have any information that you would like to include and you would like the school to know or the district to know, that's your time to include that information in that section. Then we go into a transition plan for all of our students that are 14 and over. That we go through goals and benchmarks, any sort of modifications, accommodations that can be written into the IEP are in that section. And then we end with the specifically designed instruction and any related services. So that's basically the contents of the IEP, and my colleagues will go into those in further detail. So we start with the IEP team. So who's required to be involved on the team? Just so that you know, as a parent or if you are a caregiver, the district has to have 3 district employees involved in the IEP teams, and then there is the parents. So technically, if you are wanting to advocate for additional services, accommodations, and the school is giving you pushback, it would be technically the parent versus the 3 district employees. So you have the special education who's required to be a part of the IEP team, a regular ed teacher, so the general ed teacher. Hopefully that teacher is familiar with the student. If the student doesn't have a lot of general education time, you would want to push for a teacher that actually knows the student. So please keep that in mind, because sometimes they pull in general ed teachers that are not familiar with the student. Also, an LEA, so a local education agency representative. They refer to this as the LEA. That's usually like the facilitator, like Leslie mentioned, they call them the seats. It can also be an administrator, it can be a dean, it can be a counselor, it can be the school psychologist, but there's an LEA that has to be a part of the team as well. And then that 4th person is the parent. Now, as the parent, you are able to invite anyone that you think should be involved on the team. So like myself and my colleagues, we're education advocates. We attend IEP meetings all the time. So if you think that you need additional supports or someone to help you with the advocacy portion, please, like Leslie mentioned, feel free to contact our office. We are here to help. We answer questions and we guide you through the process, but please feel free to make sure that if you need assistance with the IEP meetings, you are contacting an advocate to assist you with that process. Now, keep in mind that with the IDEA, the IEP process, these are what qualify under the parent category. So there's a biological parent, the adoptive parent, legal guardians, person who is acting as in the parent's place, so like a fictive kin, a foster parent, and then a surrogate parent. We now refer to that as an education decision maker here in Nevada. We also known as an EDM. So if you hear anything like EDM, surrogate parent, volunteer education advocate, those are all as well the same as the parent category. So that person is able to sign off as the parent. Keep in mind the caseworker, so if we're dealing with foster care students, the caseworker is not able to sign off on IEPs or special education like the evaluations. So please keep in mind that we will have to have somebody act as a parent when it comes to that education decision making right. And then the next section, we get past the signing on the first page when we see who participated in the IEP. The next section goes into present levels. So how is the student currently performing? At this point, a couple of schools or a handful of schools should have already pulled data and conducted their baseline. How's the student doing? Where are they at? We are seeing a lot of our clients right now have regressed. So we want to make sure that in the current present levels, if you are conducting an IEP meeting to make changes with distance learning, you are including the difference basically between how a student was doing when they were in person in school receiving instruction direct, or how are they doing now that it's distance learning, how they are doing with this online hybrid learning model. Make sure that the school is outlining this. They're including, basically where the student is at, where they should be performing at, a typical peer at their age, at their grade level, what they're performing at, and where your student is performing at. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the present level for your students. They look at academic achievements, language, communication skills, social, emotional, behavioral, health, motor skills, adaptive skills, vocational skills, and then other skills as appropriate. So we want to make sure that the present levels are a clear picture of what's currently happening with this situation with distance learning. Another thing I want to keep in mind is, because I think I'm going to Anthony now, is the school district here in Clark County is doing a lot of informal meetings lately. So they're holding meetings where they call it, it's not a formal IEP. So they're having the parent and the teacher collaborate on an IEP together, and they send the IEP draft to the parent, and then the parent can agree or disagree. What we're telling our clients and our students, if you think that students need additional accommodations that are not provided in the draft IEP, to make sure you ask for that formal meeting. So make sure to ask for all required members to attend that meeting. That way you can make changes to the IEP.
This is presenting present level recommendations for online learning. On this, we want to know how the child's performing during his progress from the last IEP meeting to the next one. So we want to look at the IEP progress reports. One of the things we want to look at right now is what was the report before COVID-19 was in place, and if there's any unsatisfactory marks, goals need to be changed, or anything that needs to be made easier to break down. So on this, we want to ask for the teachers for the data they've collected on the child during their schoolwork, any observations you have of your students during the virtual learning period, and you want to put in any notes you have. You want to have them written down to give them to the teachers during this time. What are the child's current abilities compared with Nevada academic content standards? And the links are there on the slide. So on the IEP component goals and benchmarks, one of the things we want to look for is we want to create measurable one-year goals, easy to understand for the child and the team. And we want to make sure that it's based on the child's deficit areas and their current struggles in school. You want to look at their present levels and then make measurable, achievable goals. I have notes, I apologize. I didn't expect it on page 25. So you want to make them specified to the kiddo. Next page. So the goals and objectives, you want to make sure that they're updated for the current and present levels, for what a child can do in 1 year based on current learning model. So you want to make them, you want the goals to be not like we'll increase 20%, 40%, 60% on their math, the reading skills. You want to put the kind of sentence structure they can read, or you want to put in measurable math goals, not just increase their mathematic abilities by 20%. You want to put in, if he's having problems with multiplication, you want to put in something like we'll be able to do up to multiples of 6 or multiples of 7, etc. And I like this, the example of the core goal. Biannual review date, Johnny will read at grade level of 80%. So that's not really individualized. That's a generic goal. You don't want to get stuck on that. You want to put it specific to the kiddo and what his problems are. And then I like the example of the good goal. Biannual review, Johnny understands how common prefixes and suffixes change the meaning of a word and able to read words with common prefixes and suffixes. So that's really being specific to your child's needs. You don't want it to be boilerplate, as they say. IEP components and other sections. So the description of specially designed instruction, what areas the child will receive support in, type of support, and how many minutes of support, where the support will be given. So you want specially designed instruction in practicality or a plan on how the child would be supported to achieve the goals and benchmarks. So what are the aids and services there to help the kid reach those benchmarks, whether it's occupational therapy, physical therapy, assistive technology for speech and language, the justification or explanation of the extent, if any, to which the student will not participate or be placed with non-disabled students. So you want them to be in a regular class setting as much as possible with only the least amount of time in the resource rooms or the IEP components, SDI and the LRE continuing placement. So students with disabilities must be educated in a least restrictive environment. First discussions should take place on whether the child can be supported in a general education classroom. This is delivered through specially designed instruction, SDI or LRE. The district must offer a continuum of placement for the LRE. So CCSD's placements include a regular ed classroom with aids and services, regular ed and special ed or resource room combo, self-contained program, special schools in Las Vegas particularly are Miley and Variety. And then there's residential treatment centers, hospitals, and other. Before deciding on a placement for the student, the IEP team should review each goal and discuss whether or not the goal could be met in the least restrictive environment. So you always want to keep them in the least restrictive environment or with the general ed classroom as much as possible. And here's a good flow chart, continuing placements. So least restrictive to more restrictive, regular classroom, maybe resource class, specialized classes, special schools, and in the hospital, institution, or homebound. Next. SDI and LRE recommendations for online learning. So minutes and locations, that's what's going on right now specifically with distance learning. Like Elka was saying earlier, when the school reaches out to the parents, they just want the teacher and then the parent there to change the minutes. So if you feel uncomfortable with just modifying the minutes to distance learning, that's when you have to speak up and you can reach out to any of us if you need help with that to tell the school district, no, I want a formal IEP meeting because my child needs more than just minutes. They need help with getting access to the technology. They might need a couple more minutes in order to boot up the technology or troubleshooting any kind of technical issues they might have. And that's your right. And so always make sure you request that official IEP meeting if you need it. So modifications and accommodations, supplemental aids and services support student in an educational environment to help achieve goals. So these services include aid services and other supports in regular education classrooms, education-related settings, and extracurricular activities and non-academic settings to enable students with disabilities to be educated with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent possible. So this can include anything to modify the environment or teaching to help the child. This should be specific to cover all locations and situations, especially with distance learning. This should indicate what the school will do to support the child, not what the child should do. So here are some recommendations for online learning. Suggestions should be specific to the homeschool communication plan, recorded lessons, and that's something that I'm seeing is still not being rolled out effectively. I mean, it should be done already, but a lot of schools that I'm seeing don't have good recorded lessons being implemented just yet in the IEP, so you really got to push for that and stay on them. I think some schools have kind of worked out the bugs, but other schools have not. Breaks, so you want to make sure that the kid has enough breaks to get up, walk around, cool off, and then that way they can refocus on their work. So if you want to have a break every 30 minutes or every 25 minutes to give them a 5-minute break to cool off, to kind of run around a little bit, that's always good. Special ed support should happen to best help the child. Support to happen during independent work at times. So one of the things I've been doing here is I try to schedule at least 2 or 3 check-ins with the special ed teacher and the kiddo. So not just, oh, here the independent learning hours are here and call me anytime here. I try to make sure they put in the IEP that there's 2 or 3 scheduled days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday at 8:30 or 9:30, when the teacher will call them up on video one-on-one and talk with the kid and kind of say, hey, how's it going? What trouble are you having? What problems are you having? It's also a time for the parent to speak with the teacher as well as any observations they have. And this way you keep the lines of communication open and it's individualized to your student, to your child. And then visual schedules are good to help too. And then faith in the IEP transition. So at 14, the IEP should continue goals and classes that prepare a child to transition to adulthood. So this is where you want to start asking what they want to have for their career goals, and what they want to think about for school or college. These services can include the following: colleges, community college, vocational training, independent living skills, and community participation skills. Transition services can include both work and life skills. Services are to be based on the individual student's needs, taking into account the student's preferences and interests. And I'm going to let Amy take over from here.
When you're attending an IEP meeting, the team should go over procedural safeguards and your parental rights, which is a document that contains all the rules and regulations that are put in place as discussed at the beginning of this webinar, of the NRS and the NAC and IDEA, everything they have to provide to the parent to make sure that the parent's rights are in fact held in place. The prior written notices, as we discussed earlier, you usually get those twice. You get a prior written notice with the date and time agreed to for the IEP meeting, and then the second usually also contains the names of the individuals you want to bring with you, as well as everyone else who will be attending, so that you have the date and time ready to go. If anything needs to be changed, that's the time to do it. Participation and consent is that the parent has agreed to participate in this program, and that they want the services and support that the school is ready offering to the student to make them successful. Access, amendment, and confidentiality of your records. The parent always has that right to do that, to look at the student's record, review it, and go from there. And the procedural safeguards also share about the procedures and remedies for disagreements should they disagree with the IEP team. As we said earlier, at the beginning of the IEP meeting, parents have their chance to express their parental educational concerns. When a parent does that, there is an actual section in the IEP, a box, where the school must type in the parent's concerns word for word. I've gone back with parents before to say that's not what the parent said, this is what they said, so that they make sure word for word what the parent wants put in to that IEP as their concerns gets in there, so there is no question about what the parent wanted. Concerns, recommendations for online learning. So as we said, some of our kiddos have been struggling with the online learning process. We have, we have made all kinds of different accommodations. I recently was in an IEP where we increased the students' time, as we discussed earlier. In an IEP for certain subjects, a student gets so many minutes with maybe a special ed teacher, maybe with a one-on-one aide. Right now, we can't do that, so I requested that time be added with the teacher virtually, so the student is still getting a decent amount of time with that individual. So these kinds of accommodations can be made during this online process. As I said earlier, the parent has a right, or the caregiver has a right, to review the student's records to see what has gone on in the student's educational profile background. If they see that there are some things that are inaccurate or misleading, they can definitely ask the school to go in and make an amendment in a note that that parent participated in that meeting. They disagreed with what was said. The notation is misleading and not exactly what happened in a certain situation. So they can, a caregiver and or a parent can petition to make sure that there's an amendment put in there so that, an opinion of a child is not made just by someone's notation in their file. I feel like I'm going through this really fast, so I apologize if you feel like I am. Parents' rights, procedurals, remedies, and disagreements. As we shared earlier, if a parent disagrees with a team's decision, should a team come say, you know what, we don't think that a student needs an IEP, a parent can disagree and say, I want an independent educational evaluation done, which is an IEE, and the district will pay for that to be done by an individual outside of the school district. Then the parent would come in with that IEP or IEE once it is finished and ask that the team review that with them, go over it, see if maybe their mind could be changed on what deficits the evaluator found outside of the school district. And that has happened to us before as well, where we've gone in and we've said, hey, this is what the evaluator found. There are some discrepancies with your testing, so we think that we need to make some accommodations for the student, and the district has done that. There's also the state complaint that goes to the Nevada Department of Education. Of course, with the state complaint, I'm sorry, I put this in my notes. In the state complaint, that's usually filed if we believe that the law has been broken by a particular agency, or that their SPED rights have been violated. But the Nevada Department of Education does not determine placement, or it doesn't change individuals' eligibility. That's not what the state complaint does. And then there's also the Office of Civil Rights. If you believe that your civil rights have been violated in some fashion by the district, an OCR complaint can be filed as well. This just goes through the slide just goes through the different kinds of complaints that can be filed. Our office does file due process complaints on a regular basis, where we work with the school district to get accommodations and needs for a student met. We also file state complaints as well, but these are the on the slide, these are the various areas in which one can file under certain sections. And are there any questions?
We did have one question in regards to a student was in the midst of an evaluation, and then the pandemic happened, and the school, the foster parent or the caregiver unenrolled the student, and then they put them into a new school, and kind of the process was just stuck at that point. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not getting your question across properly. But what I'm thinking, that's your question. So now you're at a new school, it's the distance learning situation. What I would recommend on my end, and panelists, please feel free to chime in, but what I would recommend is make sure if you can get any information from the previous school, so it seems like it was Cox Elementary School, along with the outside assessments that you were talking about here, so you had an assessment through Ackerman, I would take any information that the previous school has, if they started the evaluation. If you signed a form called the CCF 555, which is the consent to evaluate form, the time frame, the 45 school day time frame paused, and then it started over again once you kicked back into this school year. So it should have started again on August 24th if it started in the last school year. Now, if it hadn't started and if you didn't sign the consent form, then you have to sign that consent form as soon as possible. So with the new school, I would recommend that you ask for a meeting right away. You're going to have to ask for the evaluation again, but provide as much information as you can and let the school know that during this time, unfortunately, at the previous school, they weren't able to conduct the evaluation, but you really do want this to be done fairly quickly. And just so you know, unfortunately, they have 45 school days, which usually pushes it out 3 months. And a lot of our schools, it's going half and half, but a lot of my schools right now are telling me that they are going to be taking the full 45 days to conduct the assessments. The positive to this, the light at the end of this tunnel is that schools are conducting some of the assessments in person. So when it comes to like meeting with the nurse or meeting with the school psychologist, I have had a couple of my clients schedule meetings with the schools where they have to go through the COVID questions. They have to do a screener. There's a specific room on campus where they go for the assessment, but they are conducting the assessments in person for certain portions of the assessments. And I think that was your question. I hope I answered it properly. Did anybody else want to chime in?
I was just going to add too that, yeah, and unfortunately, so if you're with the same school district, which obviously you just moved schools, they're still, as Ilka said, they're still required to move forward with the evaluation. The time frame still kick in, so that does not change. So as mentioned, the old schools or the new school is going to look into the old school and get information there, and they will just pick up where the last school dropped off because you changed schools. But the other part is again, you do have that 45 days, and you do have the 30 days to possibly create an IEP. So during that time, though, that doesn't mean that your child can't get support or services. So just another recommendation is to call up either talk to the teacher or talk to the principal of your new school and just find out, say, whatever your child's struggling in, I'm sure they already know, but just ask, what supports are available on campus while this is being done? Is there someone who can work with my child? Are there extra programs that could work with my child that can help them in those areas? So just because they're doing an evaluation, that doesn't mean that you can't start asking for some support from the school, or to even, like, if you needed an intervention, you could ask the word intervention. You could see if there's anybody on campus who can help your child. So just call up the principal, or I would call up the administrator, assistant principal, or principal. Let them know what your concerns are if they don't know already, and just see what's available between now and then, and try to get some services available too. And if you have any questions, you have any sort of concerns, again, please contact your DFS representative. I can help, but the legal aid team is absolutely wonderful in working with you guys too. So.
And to follow up on that, she did mention that it's now a charter school, and things are a little bit different with charter schools, but they do provide those accommodations as well. It just looks a little bit different. And right now during distance learning, everyone's online, so it doesn't look that different at this point. But they can provide an IEP. So what I would do on your end is I would ask the principal, like Leslie just mentioned, to let them know that you started the process and that you would like to continue that process. And the key is to sign the CCF 555, because as soon as you sign that, that's when the clock starts ticking. We have another question. This one is, I have an IEP for my child who was passed from the 5th grade, and he's reading at a 2nd grade level. All of his teachers just say how sweet he is and his goals are met, but no way he is meeting his goals and he can't read. So if that's the case, Amy, you want to chime in, or does anybody else want to chime in? I don't want to talk too much.
I can share that I have a couple of students who are in this situation as well. We just looked at the goals for reading to figure out why we're still at a 2nd grade level compared to goals before, to see why we're not progressing, to figure out how we can start closing that gap a little bit faster. So it would depend on what the goals are. You're saying that he's meeting the goals. So I'm assuming that
Not meeting. I don't think he's meeting the goals.
but she's saying that they're saying the goals are met, but there's no way he's meeting the goals because he can't read. So I would wonder, are the goals getting harder and harder so that he starts to progressing and that window is closing? I would look at his goals to see what they look like, and I would insist that maybe we have more than one goal. If there's only one reading goal, there could be that he needs a few, because and I'd want to know what services are put in place for him to help with that goal. Is he going to resource for reading? Is he do they have someone coming in during class to help him with his reading? Like what services are being put in place as well?
And I think across the board, a takeaway from that question is, if your student is not able to meet the goal they do a time frame within a year. If the time frame within a year they don't achieve the goal and they're not achieving the benchmarks, then make sure you revise the goal. Don't wait the whole year. If you see that the benchmark is not achievable, make sure you take it down a notch. And that's why you're able to revise the IEP at any point in time. You don't have to wait for the annual meeting to change the IEP. And that's something that schools are kind of shying over right now. They're not really saying it's the annual meeting. They're just saying it's an informal meeting. So all they're really trying to change at this point, like Anthony mentioned, is the synchronous and asynchronous minutes. They're trying to add that for distance learning. Make sure that if you want the goals to change and if you want the present levels to change and the accommodations to change, you ask for that formal meeting, because they won't be able to make those specific changes unless you request a formal meeting.
I also might just recommend too that, all of the reading goals and the goals should be based off the Nevada content standards. And so it's the core curriculum basically. And so you've got your 5th grade standards, you've got your 4th grade standards, you've got your 3rd on down. So again, if, you can look at those to help also plan first. So you can actually look up what are the content standards for your child in 5th grade. If they can't meet that, go to the 4th, go to the 3rd. So you can actually align those. So it's always good to know as to what are the different, and that could just help to kind of give you a baseline as to where your child should be. So if the 5th grade ones are not working, go to the 4th grade, go to the 3rd ones. There's information on the Clark County School District, or you can even ask your child's school about getting those Common Core goals or some of them, so that you can actually look and see what those standards are.
I would also say that maybe talk to the school about doing some continued testing or updated testing. Maybe dyslexia is in the picture as well, and we're not noticing it yet, or we are noticing it, but we need to put it down on paper. And the standard assessments should be telling us if he's progressing as well. If he's not, we need to find out why.
So like Leslie previously mentioned, we are here to support you guys. We are here to support parents, caregivers, fictive kin, anyone that needs any assistance with special education services. Please feel free to reach out to Leslie, myself, Anthony, Amy, also our team chief, Kelly. We're all here to utilize as a resource. So please feel free to contact us if you need anything.